So in the previous part, we talked about stepping into the other person's shoes in a genuine way, not bringing our baggage with us, not in an attempt to effectively go into their position and then fix it with our cognitive stacks, our values and beliefs, and the way that we navigate life that we might be tempted to impose upon them. It's funny, I've been in a Facebook group and I left today because I was just sick and tired. I thought it was a progressive group, some good discussions, but when it gets onto the tricky stuff, again, it just comes out that people are throwing their opinions and basically saying, I've given you my opinion and that is the right way to look at it. And if you're upset by that, that's just for you to deal with. Well, that wasn't directed at me, but it's the thinking behind it. It's like, this is my opinion, and then the slippery slope, it's fact, and the slippery slope, and that you don't like it means that you're wrong, and you just have to get over that. And there was no argument, no premise offered, and it was just such a clusterfuck of things that were said that made no coherent sense. And what's interesting is, during the course of this conversation, I challenged it a little bit, and a few other people started dogpiling in, saying, you're wrong, it's this, it's that. No arguments, no counter-arguments, no examples, no facts or data, just, you're wrong, that's not the truth. This is quite an evil thing for you to say. And I noticed, because in the other audios we've done, again, in the cognitive stack, people have these concepts of good and bad, right and wrong, truth and fiction, and they all sound like synonyms, but it was quite interesting to look at the responses. So I stood my ground a little bit, and then I asked some quite direct and pertinent questions, and then it went quiet for a couple of hours. And then the founder of the group came along and more or less said, I actually kind of agree with John here, in a roundabout sort of way. Almost immediately, all the comments that I'd left now started getting likes and bumped, and I thought, wow, here we are, cult of personality. I thought it was in a progressive, free-thinking group, and it's actually just another circle jerk of pleasing or being sycophants to their charismatic leader. And I thought, oh God, I'm in another one. And so that's another group I've either left or got kicked out of. And I'm wondering, where's my place? As I've mentioned in other audios, I find the philosophy groups fascinating, because what is philosophy if nothing else but an exploration of the meanings of concepts and words? So the very philosophy, the very idea of telling somebody you're wrong in a philosophy group is the antithesis of what philosophy is. Yet go in any philosophy group and find a conversation about Dostoevsky or Nietzsche or Camus and offer a slightly different interpretation as to the traditional or well-accepted meaning of those works, and see how many seconds it takes before you're told you're wrong, which fascinating. Again, it's the same idea, we're the gatekeepers to this information. We've formed a bubble and we don't like challenge because, well, I think I mentioned it in another audio. There was another picture on Facebook that came up in my feed, and it was a picture of Superman in stockings and high heels. And it jolted me for a minute, and I thought, ooh, because Superman, the icon of power and masculinity and strength and justice, and all those things don't come in stockings and high heels. Suddenly revealed my own prejudices, and that was a bit of more of a shock than actually seeing the image. And then I thought, why am I threatened by this so much? Is my own sense of ego, is my own sense of self-centeredness, my self-esteem so easily challenged? And in that thought, let it all go. It's like, yeah, draw what you like. Go for it, knock yourself out. Explore all those questions. And suddenly I realised the brilliance of the artwork. There in a simple drawing, somebody had achieved a great thing that words would have taken a few hundred pages to do. But it's weird, isn't it? Like art, we can look at it, get our own meaning, ask ourselves our own questions. And going back to the Francis Bacon episodes, the great artists ask the great questions, but they also recognise that people who come to their paintings are at very different stages and levels of life. And to be able to pace and lead all those different people into a question that's appropriate for them through an image is no easy thing. And I think that's why the greats are so revered, because it takes time, it takes conceptualization. I think it takes a lot of practice, not just in the art form, but also in understanding people. So it gives this extra depth of appreciation. The older we get, we come back and find something new in that painting we've seen 1,000 times before. And also in respects of context, it seems like we all like to have a grounding in life. There's certain things that we believe, Superman, strength, masculinity, truth, justice, and that doesn't wear high heels. High heels are for, pick your stereotype. And that's the danger, isn't it? And we let these stereotypes define us. And because they define us, we then have a vested position in defending them. Wow. I mean, it's attachment, it's addiction, it's fear. Anyway, accurate empathy. Most people, most of the time, assume that their interpretations are accurate and they act accordingly, which can be the source of a great deal of misunderstanding and conflict. And I refer back to these Facebook groups that I've been in, philosophy, nihilism, some art, left-wing, right-wing, fascist, incel, progressive, LGBTQ plus groups. There doesn't seem to be any group that has any smarter thinking or any more rehearsed argumentation. It seems like people join the groups to find an answer or to bolster their position. I mean, the very question I mentioned earlier was based on someone who was in the group who said that they'd mentioned something else in the forum and they'd been accused of being a racist. And they were coming here to ask, is this statement racist? And that was the basis of the conversation. And then, as I say, what occurred after that is people were just bolstering their own positions. There was no questions being asked. There was no thought-provoking challenge. It was just, this is my opinion and it's the right one. And, that is a very harmful position to hold with no explanation. And they didn't even explain their reasoning as to how they got their conclusion. It was just offered as a matter of fact. And something I'm going to get onto perhaps in 3 or 4 audios time. I haven't scripted this one, so it's off the cuff. But there is a notion in communication and listening of the P's and D's. So we tell someone what pleases us and we tell someone what displeases us. And this is something that's used in motivational interviewing techniques. When you want to stand out to the boss, you go into the boss's office and you ask me, tell me 3 things I should always do, tell me 3 things I should never do. And then people really have to stop and think. It's a difficult question to ask because you're asking for 6 things and they have to hold 2 opposites in mind, the do's and the don'ts, and then go through each list and make sure that they're not in conflict with each other. So it's a really good, clever, clear question that really makes people think. So it's the same thing with the tell me things that please you, tell me things that displease you, or P's and D's. But what normally happens in conversation and personal relationships, as far as I can tell, is you meet somebody, you're having a good time, you're getting intimate, you're getting all the P's, please, this is what pleases me, and then the other person does it because it pleases them, and then it's reciprocated, and you get through this kind of honeymoon period of being a people pleaser. And it's cool and it's great. And then the months go by, first falling out, nothing said. A few months later, second major falling out, nothing said, we'll go back to pleasing each other. And all these unresolved issues start to occur with a great frequency. And because they're not tackled, they're just brushed over with more pleasing. So you go and buy that watch for them, or you go and buy that necklace for them, or you take them out to somewhere super special. And so you're really only amplifying one side, but the other side is getting magnified as well without you having to do anything. So then you sit down and you have this conversation. All right, I know what pleases you. Tell me what displeases you. Because I haven't quite worked it out. I know I get an adverse reaction when I do some things. The problem with asking someone to tell you the things that you do that displease them is you have to be prepared for the answer. And I think this is a mistake that people tend to make, is that they are not prepared. They want to ask the question to get the information, but they're not prepared to accept the answer. So you can imagine the disaster that follows. I don't like it. It displeases me when you're inconsiderate. Inconsiderate? How rude. I'm never inconsiderate. And here we are. So that is, when you invite people to tell you these so-called D's, you have to be prepared and make space for that. And I'll perhaps say a little bit about that later on. it really comes down to listening first and not reacting, getting into their shoes. Maybe what they mean by inconsiderate isn't what you mean by inconsiderate. But in throwing it back, saying I'm not inconsiderate, you're basically saying their judgment and evaluation is invalid. And if that's been the case, but they still have this adverse reaction to what they're labelling as inconsiderate, it makes them look a bit crazy, doesn't it? So what you're saying is that your judgment is impaired and you're having an irrational reaction. In other words, you're calling them crazy. Been there, done that. It's a mild form of gaslighting, except I didn't even know that's what I was doing at the time, and this is how it happens. Some people, of course, do it deliberately. I just learned it by accident that this is a pattern of speech I say to get my own way, but now I know better. I'm coming out of that Dunning-Kruger curve on the other side. I've been in a valley of despair, and I'm actually trying to learn to listen, and it's breaking habits of a lifetime. So empathy, not to be confused with sympathy. And I think depending on the order of videos you've watched, I've talked about distance quite a lot. We've mentioned it in Francis Bacon and Art, and the descent and the distance, and we've mentioned it in Machiavelli series, and we mentioned it in Bob Iger, Ride of a Lifetime series. These distances between people, cultural, social, technological, language, ideology, wealth and class, are manipulators. So I keep saying it, we'll get to it. Dave Grossman's book on killing talks about how to condition people to kill through distancing ourselves from other, so much so that in fact other is not even human anymore. The other is just a number on a spreadsheet to be erased, and then you can pull a trigger. But even there's a distance and a kind of mechanical ability about it. Killing someone with bare hands is quite a gruesome thing to do. Stabbing them with a knife is still gruesome, but it's a bit easier. Shooting them with a rifle from 300 yards is still gruesome, but a bit easier. Firing an Amran or a Exocet, it's just a video game then, isn't it? And then, telling somebody to send in a drone is an even further distance from the act of what you're actually doing, and the further the distance you put between them, the easier it becomes. So this is another thing to be aware of in communication. What's your valence? Are you moving towards, or are you trying to put distance between people? And when you make judgments and evaluations, you're not trying to understand, you're trying to put distance. When you're trying to understand and listen to people, you're trying to narrow those gaps. So all the while, if we're at least aware of these attributes of distance, like cultural difference, we have to either adjust to their culture or the things that they might say whilst they're outside of their normal culture, let's say in our culture. We perhaps ought to be a bit more understanding that it's all new to them and they're learning. Social culture, of course, are more about flattening those power hierarchies, but class structures, power structures, they're there to create distance, often through things like contempt, pity, derision. And then we can start implementing policies upon those distances, like redlining and stop and search, and all that good stuff. No, it's not good stuff, I'm being sarcastic, which is another tool of distancing. So sympathy is also a tool of distancing. When we have sympathy for someone, we're feeling for them, not with them and not of them. See, again, it's all in the language. When we say, I feel sad for them, or I feel pity for someone else. You've created a boundary. Me, them, separate, else. Someone else. It's outside of us. And so immediately there's a barrier. And it's all unconscious stuff, but it's there and it creates distance. And then depending on what we feel for them, sadness, pity, we alter this kind of perceptual distance between us. I think also I get the sense that with sympathy, we might also say something like, I feel sad for them. And there seems to be an inherent judgment in this, in the sense that either they're not capable, able, or have recognised that that's what they ought to feel, so I'm going to do it for them. So again, we're making a judgment about their needs, and we haven't even asked them yet. So again, it presupposes that we know what emotion they ought to be feeling. So empathy seems to be a desire, a willingness, an effort, an investment in placing our attention on the other person in a way that not only shows our active interest, but is an active interest. We are trying to understand, perhaps on all levels, what they are experiencing in terms of inner conflict or an emotional response that they have that they don't know what to do with, or that they can't connect with, or they can't resolve, or even just they want to have one and perhaps not even necessarily resolve it, but just see, these are all judgments and assumptions. But it seems like empathy is just stepping into their world to understand, to take on, to understand, get a grip, handle, whatever you want to express it, their kind of cognitive stacks and their responses to it, what's important to them about these things, what's not important, and how that's all organised in their structure. It's not even necessarily to take on the same feelings, and we can never really experience it in the same way they can or they do. And it's always a mistake, I think, to say, when someone says, I was in this horrible car accident and this happened and that happened and the consequence was this, and they tell us all these bad things and we just go there, oh yeah, it was just like when I had a car accident. No, it's not the same. That's trying to identify with them, and it's not the same. So empathy doesn't even require that we've had the same experiences. It might mean that if we haven't had anything similar, we might have to work a bit harder in terms of getting frameworks and context for understanding. But again, that might be a good thing, because if we had similar circumstances, we might be tempted to make certain assumptions which might not be true, from odds are they're not. So it seems skillful empathy results from a clarity of communication, and I might expect that if we've understood people to these kind of deep levels, this kind of emergent phenomenon occurs that we call a bond with people. I was still fuzzy about this kind of stuff because, okay, we can understand people, we can get in their heads, we can be there for some emotional situation for them. But 2-3 years down the line, things change. Okay, we might pay respect, and we might allow people closer in our lives because of that experience, if that's what's meant by bond. I'm TJ, what the fuck do I know about bonding? One of the things Francis Bacon said in his book, if you refer to that series, is travel. And successful people in life, people who've done big things, seem to say the same thing. Travel. Not just geographically, but mentally. Try different cultures, different social groups, different Facebook groups, and you'll see certain patterns emerge, and you'll experience new things, and you'll realise your way isn't the only way. And some people have really cute solutions to life, which you've scratched your head about for years, and they've got a solution for that. And it's fascinating sometimes just watching people solve problems. And I missed out on this opportunity, but years and years ago, I'm sure you've noticed that it goes right back to the 70s. Depending on how old you are, and you might not get this reference, but there was a time when people would put quarters and 10p and 20p and 50p's into slot machines to play video games in arcades that were outside of their home and not on a mobile device. And on a Friday evening or Saturday afternoon at a popular arcade, you'd be playing the machine and there'd be 10 people squeezed around you watching the same screen. And it was bizarre, the imposition of personal space to watch you play this video game. And there it is. People want to watch how you do it, watch how you did it, see if you beat the high score. And then years later, when I used to watch people playing FIFA or Portal 2, I especially liked watching people play Portal 2 because it was problem solving. I liked to watch how people solve problems. Found it endlessly fascinating. And look how big it's become now on YouTube and Twitch. Game streamers, it's massive. Monkey see, monkey do. I think it's because it's a way for us to rehearse. It's a way for us to practice at low cost. We watch how other people do it. We watched them going first. And in episode 2 on Machiavelli and the Prince, I introduced the story of the monkeys and the rock salt and how curiosity can help you find water in a desert. And because of this reflexive feedback, there's no way that we can travel and not be changed. So I think even taking on these kind of questions that are involved in greater empathy, the responses you get back are going to change you. And so I think the whole process of becoming more empathic can change your outlook on life. I think it's a good one. It's going to be a good one for me, especially to let go of my perceptions and my insistence that my judgment is very good because, well, science and maths and physics, and it's all explainable in this way. And to a large degree, I still hold to that, but it's not what the human experience is about. It might be all well and good developing a new phone or a tablet that's faster, cheaper, and 5G and artificial intelligence. But my commentary with all that industry is they're rushing into that. And do they know the impact it will have on human experience? Who's following up in that? Who's connecting the dots with that? Who's building into these systems a bit of human empathy? It just seems to make it a little bit colder place. No, I don't want the app that wakes me up at 7 a.m. Good morning, how are you today? No. Yeah, so it's just something I noticed in these groups. People don't even necessarily ask questions in good faith. They ask questions to get their own bias confirmed. People give answers to either challenge that and confirm their own bias. And so there seems very little good faith questioning. There was one group I was in. Oh, but that turned to ratchet as well. It was a cyberpunk group. Some very interesting people in there because cyberpunk, it's one of those genres that, of course, as soon as you go in, you find your gatekeepers, what cyberpunk is and what it isn't. But there's lots of different people in there from very different age groups. And because it's almost a transhuman experience, the normal stereotypes and restrictions of who can say what. And, the very notion of Superman wearing stockings and makeup and frizzy hair and then kind of giving him a mechanical sort of look or a flash of neon is almost cyberpunk in itself. That's what I liked about the group. And there was a few people in there that were really, really crazy, intensive, curious. They just always asked questions. And they were always up for reading a new book, or they were always up for seeing something in a new way, and they were always up for how can I incorporate this, and how can I glitch it. And there seems to be, I read a book on glitching, fascinating, and if you can find out what glitching is, do it. Because glitching, it reminds me of a book, The Dice Man by Luke Reinhardt, and Luke Reinhardt was a pen name, of course. But it was of this guy who just lived his life according to the roll of a die. He didn't question it, he just did it. And it just led him into experiences that he normally would shy away from. And it seems a little bit the same in, these few members that I met in the cyberpunk group. They would just take something and then glitch it, and whatever the result was, they'd try and use it. So it didn't have any preconceived ideas of what it should be, what it ought to be, or any preconceived ideas of even how it could be fused, or should it be fused with something else. It was just, let's clash these together and see what happens. It was a mad experiment. And so there was a real open honesty about it. And this is, I'll give you an example of a glitch. So you can appreciate that spelling checkers are just algorithms, and they work on a predefined set of rules about what language is and what words are, and the common mistakes that people make in respect of typing things, and clever algorithms that look at a word and try and guess what it was intended to be. But, there's common misspellings, a couple of letters swapped around, or I before E and all that jazz. So it really works on looking at data. What's the text representation for this character? And then what are the string representations for this word? And what are common string representations that are wrong, that are often intended to be this other sequence of strings that is called a word that's spelt correctly? What you can do then is, because it's just data, is you can take an audio file, sound waves, which again is just data, and you can feed it through a spelling checking program, and it will alter parts of the digital representation of the audio that it thinks are misspelled words, and then it'll try and correct them and then put an output. So you're taking one thing, data, and you're feeding it into a process which is not designed to work on, and forcing it to give an output, and then you see what you get. So it's a deliberate clashing of mismatch. It doesn't assume that things ought to go together just because this is a spell checker, therefore it only ought to receive text. And you can do it the other way as well. You can get some AI machine to write out a load of text and then convert that to some kind of data, force it into an MP3 envelope, and then play it and see what it sounds like. It might be horrendous, might lead to something else, who knows. This is cyberpunk. It's all how can we hack it? Not hack it, but glitch it. And it's a very non-judgmental way. But again, the reason I ended up leaving the group is because it just came so judgmental. You're not doing cyberpunk right. Rolls eyes, leaves. Also, again, it got infected by misogyny and got infected by the kind of dark web. It's really sad. Just as a note, there's a woman who has a very successful YouTube channel, and she is cyberpunk as it goes. And someone posted a picture of her in the group, and then, well, it was just all the, oh, look at the body on this, and oh, look at this skank hoe. And it's like, what the fuck are you guys doing? This person is as cyberpunk as it gets, and you're making judgments about her body. Wow. What are you doing in here? And it just became a toxic cesspit. So, it's time consuming and costly to show empathy. Got to pick your battles, I suppose. So yeah, empathy. It's getting an understanding of what the other person's thinking, feeling, experiencing, their mental frameworks, their values hierarchy, perhaps the inner conflicts that they're experiencing. And there's a lot in there. Like in NLP, we have a full stack of questions, so we can start about their environment, their behavior, their skills and capacities, their values, their beliefs and their identity. And, what do you think about that? Why is it important to you? Is it more important than the second thing on the list? Under what circumstances will that change? And it can come across as quite, cross-examination. So there's a skillful art to it as well, I think, where, especially say, for example, with the Meta Model 3, if you're familiar with NLP, you can look at what the Meta Model 3 is. But the Meta Model 3 is an attempt to recover information that's been lost in a conveyance. So when someone says, it's hot, all right, what? And how is it hot? So the Meta Model challenges by going after verbs and nouns. So here the noun hasn't been stated, so it can go, what's hot? And then we can say, well, how is it hot? And in comparison to what is it hot? And then when they say, well, the machine's hot, we can say, okay, what part of the machine? So it's always what and how, and you narrow down. And after the 3 or 4 of this, what and how, it can get monotonous, boring, and seem like an interrogation, and there's no feeling of empathy. It's just someone going down a checklist. So it seems as though we have to engage on an emotional level, not necessarily take on their feeling, but keep them in their emotional engagement. So asking questions to elicit what they're thinking or feeling, and then asking the what and the how, occasionally interspersed, seems to be the ticket.